The United States sets another global record on coronavirus. More than 60,000 new cases reported in a single day. Florida, Texas and California remain the states worst affected. Poland's presidential race on a knife edge. Andrzej Duda and Liberal challenger Rafał Trzaskowski neck and neck in the polls on this, the final day of campaigning ahead of Sunday's vote. And the mayor of the South Korean capital, Seoul, found dead days after he went missing. Park Won-soon had been accused of sexual harassment. Police say they found a note in which he says sorry to everyone. Those are the international headlines this hour. Thanks for joining us. You're watching France 24. States across the US continue to break coronavirus records. The country has recorded 60,000 new cases in a single day, a first globally. In Florida, the number of people dying from the disease doubled to 120 in just 24 hours. Over the past 2 weeks, infections have spiked in 41 out of the 50 states, and Americans are increasingly divided on the reopening of schools and businesses. Erin Ogunke has the latest.
With an additional 9,000 new cases reported on Thursday, more than 1% of the population of Florida has now been infected with the novel coronavirus. As cases spike, the state's hospitals are rapidly being stretched to the limits. Nearly half of its intensive care units are at least 90% full, and 1 in 5 of them are at full capacity.
In all honesty, we don't feel like we're moving anywhere positive in the right direction. We felt good for a while. We were able to close down the COVID ICU. We had all the COVID patients in one floor. Then this came, and then we had to open up a second floor and the third floor, and now we're into a fourth and fifth floor. And we don't see it getting any better.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has blamed the surge in cases on a backlog of testing, suggesting those who don't show symptoms should not have to self-isolate as they await their test results.
Part of the problem is when the tests are taking a long time to get turned around, if you're asymptomatic, well, what are you supposed to do? Stay home and wait if you're not sick. And then if you're symptomatic, obviously you need to know whether you have coronavirus or you have something else.
The Republican governor has been widely criticized for his response to the epidemic. He refused to close the state's beaches for spring holidays in March, waiting until April to finally order a statewide lockdown. The measures were eased just a month later, and though the state remains a long way off from flattening the curve, there is still no statewide mask order in place, and Governor Ron DeSantis has pushed for students to return to school as normal in August.
Well, Hong Kong is closing all schools from Monday after a spike in cases there. The territory recorded 34 locally transmitted cases on Thursday, the highest daily tally in more than 3 months. Public high schools were closed in January amid the early stages of the outbreak and were gradually reopened from May. But new clusters have emerged in recent days, including at an elderly care home. The UK is lifting quarantine rules for people from dozens of countries, including Italy, France and Belgium. Travellers arriving from 60 countries and British overseas territories will no longer have to spend 2 weeks in isolation. The government continues to warn people against taking cruise holidays, though. In England, leisure facilities and beauty services are now allowed to reopen. That includes swimming pools, gyms, nail bars and tattoo parlours. Well, the European Union is opening its external borders to several countries on July 1st, including Morocco, Algeria and Tunisia. But that hasn't made the situation any clearer for the hundreds of thousands of French citizens who have relatives in the region. The 3 countries all have different policies when it comes to allowing people to visit. Mohamed Fahad sent us this report.
Là, on est chez mes parents. Il y a ma sœur, mes neveux.
Fatiha is looking back at last year's pictures taken in Morocco.
Là, on avait fait une petite fête et on était ensemble.
Every summer, her 3 children spend the month of August in the country, but this year's trip is in jeopardy because of COVID-19.
On est un peu triste parce qu'on ne sait pas si on va y aller ou pas, et je pense qu'on va pas y aller parce que, comme rien n'est sûr, ils n'ont pas encore ouvert les frontières. Les gens qui rentrent au Maroc, ils doivent rester au moins 10 jours en quarantaine.
So this restaurant owner has chosen a plan B. She will be heading to the south of France with her children. Hundreds of thousands of people living in France typically travel to northern Africa each year to see their family and friends. Yogurta had flights booked for Algeria. They were cancelled.
C'était prévu que je reste les 2 mois ou 3 mois et jusqu'à ce jour les frontières sont encore fermées donc je ne peux pas y aller. Et malheureusement pendant cette période du Covid-19 j'ai perdu des proches, j'ai perdu des amis donc on attend que la reprise des vols soit faite.
But while Morocco and Algeria have yet to reopen their borders to European residents, Tunisia has chosen to lift travel restrictions. But in order to get there, would-be travelers have had to be very patient. Farouk waited in line for 4 hours in front of Tunisair's offices in Paris.
Comme il n'y a pas beaucoup d'avions cette année, à cause du corona, Covid-19, on vient sur place. Tous les billets sont chers. Chaque semaine, ça augmente entre 50 et 80 euros.
But because of the massive rise in demand, the company has decided to ramp up its operations.
On avait tablé sur une reprise à 40% de notre activité et on a donc ajusté notre programme pour aller à 60%. Donc pour le mois de juillet, on sera à 60% de notre activité et ça pourrait aller crescendo.
And there's a silver lining for those unable to travel. Residents of North Africa are allowed to visit relatives in France this summer.
Today is the final day of campaigning in Poland's presidential election ahead of Sunday's second-round runoff vote. Polls will decide between Conservative Andrzej Duda and his centrist rival Rafał Trzaskowski, who's currently the mayor of Warsaw. The two men are currently neck and neck in the polls, as France24's Gulliver Cragg reports from Warsaw. This race is extremely tight.
It's really hard to exaggerate how close it is. We've had one day Duda leading, one day Rafał Trzaskowski leading in the opinion polls, but always within the margin of error. The two men really are fighting for every vote. It seems that between the two rounds, Rafał Trzaskowski has done pretty well in courting the voters who backed the other candidates, third, fourth, fifth and sixth place candidates in the first round. Most of them are going to vote for him, including around a third of the voters of the far-right candidate, Krzysztof Bosak, who got a bit less than 7%, and who you might have thought would rather plump for Duda because they're both nationalists, broadly speaking. But no, some of the voters of the far-right prefer Rafał Trzaskowski because of his more liberal economic programmes. So Trzaskowski has done very well on that front, but the gap between him and Mr Duda, if you remember, in the first round was more than 13 points. He needed all of those votes, and Andrzej Duda is hoping to get a different reserve of voters, people who didn't vote in the first round, particularly older people who were a bit afraid to vote in the first round because of the coronavirus, but now that the stakes are so high, might be persuaded to do so in the second round. That's certainly what Jarosław Kaczynski, the leader of the ruling PiS party, who is, as it were, Andrzej Duda's unofficial boss, was clearly trying to do yesterday evening when he gave a very long interview to the ultra-Catholic TV channel TV Traum. He said that senior citizens should not be afraid to go to vote, that it's less dangerous than just going down to the shops, while the danger posed by Rafał Trzaskowski, as Mr Kaczynski put it, to traditional values in Poland is much more important.
Gulliver Cragg there reporting from Warsaw. Well, elections are underway in Singapore this Friday, with the vote expected to return Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's long-governing party to power. Senior citizens were the first to cast ballots as part of strict safety measures to stop the spread of coronavirus. People were also ordered to wear masks and, in some cases, gloves. It's the first election in Southeast Asia since the outbreak began. Lee's People Action Party has dominated politics in Singapore since 1959, when his father became the country's first prime minister. The South Korean capital Seoul has been found dead days after he went missing. Officials say they've now retrieved a note in which Park Won-soon said sorry to all people. The Liberal politician, a potential contender for the presidency, had been accused of sexual harassment. That's according to South Korean media reports. Police have ruled out foul play in his death. Wasim Cornet has more.
The search for Park Won-soon ended up lasting just a few hours, but it involved more than 600 police officers and firefighters, a drone, and several police dogs. The mayor of Seoul was found dead shortly after midnight on Thursday on a mountain in the north of the capital, close to where his phone signal was last detected. His daughter had reported him missing earlier that afternoon, telling police he had left a message that sounded, quote, like a will.
Doesn't 구체적인 사안들은 앞으로 수사를 해봐야 되겠지만 현재로서는 특별한 타살 혐의는 없어 보이지만은 향후 연사사건 그 처리 절차에 따라서 심도 깊은 수사가 진행될 예정입니다.
It was a tumultuous last few hours before Park's demise. On Wednesday, a former Seoul City employee filed a police complaint against the mayor. South Korean media outlets have reported the allegations include sexual harassment. Park Won-soon was one of South Korea's most prominent politicians. He was elected mayor of Seoul in 2011, won re-election in 2014 and again in 2018. The first of the city's mayors to ever be re-elected for a third term. He pledged to create a cleaner city and to ensure gender equality. He was also seen as a potential presidential hopeful ahead of the 2022 election. But Park also earned a reputation of being a workaholic boss. Reports say a handful of civil servants working at the Seoul city government committed suicide due to work-related stress under him. Park Won-soon was 64 years old.
Well, it's time for business now, and I'm joined by Catherine Bennett from our business desk. Good to see you, Catherine. Now, we're going to start off in Hong Kong. This new security law from China has made investors pretty skittish. There have been some ramifications for business as well. Tell us, first of all, about the banks, though. How have they been reacting?
Well, foreign banks are now having to carry out these emergency audits of their clients to see who could potentially be facing US sanctions because of this new national security law, and the US, which in turn is thinking about posing sanctions. So the US Hong Kong Autonomy Act, which could be signed as early as next week, imposes sanctions on officials who go against Hong Kong's semi-autonomous status. And that actually includes the financial bodies that do business with them. So there are a large number of banks that could be affected, from retail banks such as HSBC and Citibank to investment banks and groups such as JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. Now, because Hong Kong's national security law makes it illegal to comply with US sanctions, what this actually means for financial institutions is that they may end up having to choose between whether they do business with the US or with China. In any case, for now, there's a lot of uncertainty until the US signs the act, which should be next week, and unveils a list of businesses that could be impacted. There's actually not a lot that financial institutions can do apart from study their own client lists and make preparations for potentially ending those relationships if necessary.
And this new law, it has some consequences for social media companies as well. The video app TikTok has been pulled from Apple's App Store and the Google Play Store in Hong Kong. They'd already stopped their operations in the territory earlier in the week. What ramifications are there for social media companies?
Well, so that's right. TikTok has pulled out. And this is all because the Hong Kong security law grants authorities the power to police and remove information online if it breaches that law. So as a result, TikTok is the first social media company to pull out on a matter of principle. But Twitter and Facebook are also taking a step back and studying what the law will actually mean for them as well. Now, what may seem contradictory about all of this is that TikTok is actually owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance, and that even though TikTok doesn't operate in China. So ByteDance is part of a whole storm itself, and ByteDance has been accused of censoring content that may upset Beijing, although the company has, of course, denied this. And there were also accusations that it shares user data with China. Now, TikTok has been trying to distance itself from its Chinese parent company. The company, for instance, hired an American CEO to rebuild trust with Western regulators. They're also considering shaking up management potentially and even moving their headquarters outside of China. So TikTok leaving the Hong Kong market isn't necessarily a huge blow for the company because their main market is in the US, and that's predominantly where they want to focus on gaining ground. But what could be dangerous for them in that case is if Trump decides to follow through on his threat to potentially ban the app in the United States.
All right, a lot of companies caught in the middle there.
Yes.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Bennett there with the business. Well, that's it from the newsroom for now. Do stay with us. More news and headlines coming up.